Welcome to this installment of the Advanced Introduction to International Political Economy lecture series. Today we'll be discussing two interrelated and entangled theoretical traditions, which are still distinct from each other. And these are Latin American dependency theory and world systems theory. In the following lecture, I'll go briefly through the key theoretical pillars of each tradition, some of their key thinkers and the historical origins of these theories, as well as think about the contemporary relevance of these theories. And we're going to start with Latin American dependency theory and then move on to world systems theory and conclude after that. My name is Onni Ahvonen. My background is in political science, in political history, and in development studies. And my research interests include anti-colonial intellectual history and geographies of knowledge arising from the global south. All right, so what is dependency theory? Well, dependency theory, like many theoretical traditions, is a really complex tradition with many sort of perspectives and approaches that fall under the umbrella term of dependency theory. But there's still some sort of general features that we can talk about when we talk about dependency theorists. And I think good sort of point of departure here is a definition of dependency by a Brazilian economist, Theotonio dos Santos, who defined dependency as, quote, a situation in which the economy of certain countries is conditioned by the development and expansion of another economy to which the former is subjected. The relation of interdependence between two or more economies and between these and world trade assumes the form of dependence when some countries, the dominant ones, can expand and can be self-sustaining, while other countries, the dependent ones, can do this only as a reflection of that expansion, which can have either a positive or a negative effect on their immediate development, unquote. And so from this citation, we might infer that dependency theory is first and foremost interested in explaining unequal relationships between nation states and national economies. And it does so through a kind of center-periphery schema. And secondly, dependency theorists believe that development and underdevelopment are co-constitutive phenomena and processes. That is to say that they can't be separated from each other or looked in isolation. So they're essentially like two sides of the same coin. And so dependency theorists believe that if you only look at nation states in isolation of one another, what happens is that you hide the kind of relations of dependence. And by shifting their methodological scope, dependency theorists looking at the sort of relations between nations could see how development and underdevelopment were not sort of results of a kind of natural hierarchy or only a result out of internal developments, but instead because of global economic processes that made it possible for the periphery to be exploited and subjugated while the center enriched itself. And so dependency theorists try to explain why rich nations are rich and why poor nations are poor. And you can basically see this as a kind of expansion of Karl Marx's argument, who argue that the accumulation of wealth in the hands of the capitalists happened at the expense of the workers who had to toil and had to suffer in misery. And so basically dependency theorists expand this onto the global economic arena. Now, importantly, center and periphery here are relational categories. So you're not forever bound to a given category, but your sort of status within this global system can change. Moving on to the historical origins of dependency theory, an important historical function of dependency theory has been to question, attack, and confront some of the prevailing dogma associated with neoclassical economic doctrines and modernization theory, especially as formulated by Rostow in the 1950s. However, I'd like to point out that Modernization theory did not so much arise before dependency theory, but the other way around. So modernization theory, which sort of postulated how all nation states had to go through the same stages of development, arose in many ways thanks to the popularization of these southern theories arising from the global south. Now, broadly, we can say that there are two broad currents within Latin American dependency theory, the reformist one and the radical one. The reformist current begins with the work of Argentinian economist Raul Prebisch, and especially his work within the institutional framework of the UN Economic Commission for Latin America, short for ECLA. And it was then later developed by thinkers such as Fernando Henrique Cardoso, Osvaldo Sunkel, Celso Furtado, Aldo Ferrer, and Aníbal Pinto, among others. And so what Prebisch did in his work was that he analyzed the unequal terms of trade between economies located in the center and economies located in the periphery. And so a key sort of thesis he put forth was that the terms of trade for raw materials tended to fall in comparison with manufactured goods in the long term due to the asymmetric and unequal structure of the global capitalist economy, and because there was a greater price volatility for raw materials. And by sort of presenting this theory, Prebisch repudiated some of the Ricardian theories of comparative advantage developed famously by David Ricardo in the 18th and 19th centuries. And basically, Ricardian theories argue that peripheral nations had to sort of specialize in the given raw commodities that they could export, and then they could develop. And so the key question which Prebisch and the early dependency theorists tried to tackle was that how could these power asymmetries between the peripheral nations and the core nations be overcome, and how could the periphery find avenues for development? So these reformist dependency theorists spoke for a kind of independent or autonomous capitalist development for the peripheral nations. They had a strong focus on Keynesianism, on forms of state intervention, and they emphasized the necessity of industrial production and diversifying the economic foundation of peripheral economies, and thus lessening the reliance on these primary commodities and agricultural commodities, which again had a kind of price volatility on the global markets. And these sort of policy advocations which the reformist dependency theorists spoke for is called import substitution industrialization, short for ESI, which essentially aimed at boosting the production of manufactured goods in peripheral nations. But again, the essential aims here were economic growth and development for peripheral nations. Moving on to the radical wing of dependency theory, these theorists emerged later on in the 1960s, especially in relation to the US-backed coup in Brazil in 1964, which led to many leftist and radical academics to flee to Chile, especially to the University of Chile. And key figures here are thinkers like Mauro Marini, Theotonio dos Santos, who we mentioned before, Andre Gunnar Frank, who's probably the most famous of the dependency theorists, Vania Bambirra, Alonso Aguilar, and Anibal Chiano, who later on went on to work on decolonial theory. Now, the radical dependency theorists distinguished themselves from the reformists insofar as they rejected the idea of autonomous capitalist development in the periphery, and instead of advocating for Keynesianism and social democracy, they advocated for socialism and in some cases delinking from the global capitalist economy. They also drew a lot on Marxist theory, and as in doing so, they had a stronger focus on imperialism and the monopolistic tendencies of capitalism, as an example. These thinkers also placed an analytical emphasis not so much on the colonial period, so before the 18th century, but more so on the dynamics of capitalist accumulation after the decolonization of Latin America in the beginning of the 19th century. So moving on to dependency theory from a contemporary perspectives, I would argue that instead of looking at dependency theory as a kind of fixed theoretical framework, it works best if we approach it not so much as a finished theoretical product, but an outlined awaiting further development, as Mauro Marini once put it. And so dependency theory should be approached as a kind of open-ended research program, which can be developed still today. And in a contemporary context, we have a scholar named Kvangraven, who's made the argument that the key pillars of dependency theory as a kind of research program are, first of all, its global historical approach. Secondly, its focus on capitalism's polarized accumulation and uneven development on a global scale. Third, the analytical emphasis on the means, structures, and relations of production. And fourth, on the ways in which imperialism structurally constrains peripheral development through various mechanisms. But if these are kind of the strengths of dependency theory, what could its limitations have been? Well, I think there are many limitations to dependency theory. First of all, it's clear that there weren't many dependency theorists focusing on issues of race, of gender, of epistemology, that is to say knowledge production, or culture. Then there's the decolonial scholars who have argued that in focusing on development and modernization, dependency theorists were kind of trapped in these linear notions coming from Europe. Then there's also the issue of applying categories developed in a European context to the global South. Finally, we could say that there's the issue of methodological clarity. Since this is a really broad and general theoretical framework, some have had questions about how it could be applied in specific research areas. So is the theory too broad? Now, before we move on to world systems theory, I'd like you to think about what the strengths of dependency theory are based on my remarks here, and what you think its use could be in today's world, if it has any use today.